Just as that thought crossed his mind, her gaze turned towards the wall, and Sojiro. Suddenly, a chill ran down his spine. He reflexively covered his mouth to keep from shrieking.
あの人、昨日の。
Acting on pure instinct, Sojiro took off running. He headed straight downstairs, desperate to not be on the same floor as her. He would have run straight out of the door, but for his obligations to his job.
店長、早退します。それと、2階の人は問題ないです。
He tried to keep his composure as he spoke, jamming his school uniform into a paper bag as he ran out of the parlor. Cloudy weather brought the shadow of night over Yashikorogi as he ran through the shopping arcade towards the station. He shot up the long staircase like an arrow, quickly pulled his train pass from his wallet and passed through the ticket gate. The ticket gate was crowded with people standing around, walking and talking. The station attendant by the automatic ticket machine had an unpleasant look on his face. There was now a familiar, comforting hustle and bustle around him. Just another day in the city. Nothing like what he witnessed the night before. He could finally breathe again. The momentary rush of relief brought him to an abrupt stop. He nervously turned around. There was no way that dangerous individual could be behind him.
考えてみると。
He couldn't think of a good reason for why he'd fled so desperately. As far as he could remember, he hadn't even seen the threat's face long enough to form an opinion about her. Sojiro gave himself a good slap on the cheek to pull himself together, and quickly made his way down the platform. Unfortunately, the next train was 10 minutes away, and panicking would do him no favors, so he quietly found an empty seat and sat down. He took another deep breath. He was surrounded by people waiting for the train just like he was, and no sign of anyone pursuing him. His head finally cleared up, and he assured himself that he was overthinking things. Though he was surprised at how heavy his shoulders felt.
疲れてるのは分かってる。自分の体のことだし。
Sojiro sighed at his greater than expected fatigue. He had certainly struggled since coming down from the mountains, but in retrospect it could have been worse. Physically, he was probably holding up fine. He was much less confident in his mental state. The city and the mountains could not have been more different. He had been slow to recognize the differences and adapt. Acclimation was simple enough. Humans were nothing if not adaptable. Even without any effort, one would learn to adjust over time. Recognizing the challenges had been the hard part.
そりゃ、とにかく難しいことだらけだし。
Sojiro grumbled, a complaint he'd never uttered before. To be honest, he was still afraid to wander around town. There were so many things city people took for granted that Sojiro had yet to grasp. It was little wonder that this never-ending chain of surprises would wear on him.
そっか。疲れてるのは体じゃないのか。だから、あんな幻を見る。
He muttered to himself, then shook his head. That which exists, exists. Such was the way of all things. Tobimaru had called it a hallucination, but Sojiro knew what he saw was real. The city was a magical kingdom compared to the mountains. If there were real magicians secretly living here, that should have been no surprise at all. The thought alone made his legs tremble. It took him a moment longer to realize that they were quivering out of fear. He had feared the unnatural ever since he encountered a wild bear on a mountain path as a child.
いや、あれはこんなもんじゃなかったっけ。なりふり構わず泣き叫んだもんな。
Sojiro smiled a little as he recalled his traumatic childhood memory. Anyone would have fainted at the sudden appearance of a growling beast that towered over 6 feet tall. The monster in the movie that Sojiro saw not 2 days ago was the equivalent of a cuddly stuffed animal when compared to the wild mountain creature. He was reminded that he'd faced far worse before, and his ordeal now was something he could endure.
そうだよな。今の問題はちらっと聞こえた最後のセリフか。捕まえて始末するっていうのはどうなんだ。
At face value, the meaning was obvious. But the implications were simply too frightening to contemplate seriously. Perhaps he had misheard the words, or perhaps the speaker had misspoke.
都会のルール。誰かがきっと罰しに来る。
Even as he said it, the idea didn't feel quite real. It was hard to imagine that it applied to him. Sojiro breathed in and closed his eyes. His vision dimmed, putting the illuminated cityscape out of sight and out of mind. For now, he resolved to put last night's event behind him. When he opened his eyes, his breathing had calmed.
それでさ、青崎を殴りつけようとして結局どうなったんだ、飛び丸。
The question suddenly popped into Sojiro's head. He decided he would ask next time and stood up from his chair. A long streak of light blazed by, announcing the arrival of the next train. Ah, Kapitel fertig. Haben wir extra Chapters? Yeah. Nee, das ist Chapter 2. Okay. Dann geht's einfach weiter. Nights. Events of yesterday transpired. On moonless nights, you must never look back. Was it a lesson or was it a warning? It was so very long ago. At the time, I could not have imagined what my very being would become. One night, it came without a warning. I was filled with an anxiety so heightened that it made me want to burst into tears. So I fled to my grandfather's workshop. Unlike the grandfather I knew, he smiled and kindly placed his hand upon my head. Yes, the Red Death follows your every step. Rather than consoling me, he sent me home with only those haunting words. That night, I'm certain that I sensed a shadow lurking behind me. Something or someone watching me from afar. Then little by little, year by year, it drew closer. Eventually, the presence that once felt like a spot on the horizon grew so close that I could feel its breath down the base of my neck. Of course, it was all in my mind. When I turned around, nobody was there. But that night marked the beginning. In hindsight, I later understood that the indescribable anxiety I felt was the dread of certain death.
Hey dido dido, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed.
Alice? How much time has passed since that night? It lingered deep in the recesses of my mind where childhood memories are kept. A faded story, book-esque memory. On dark nights, I still hear the faint echo of my grandfather's words. But no matter how strong the wind may howl, or how entrancing the song of the girl next to me, I could never bury his ominous words completely.
ご到着ね。
The girl besides me said. Alice's inflectionless voice spoke volume of her role as the bystander. That night, there was only me and her. It was the night I would mark as the birth of who I am today. For what should have been quite the memorable night, it sure wasn't a promising start. Dense clouds blocked the starlight above like a black umbrella. Strong wind tore through the sky, carrying the heavy clouds with it. The hands on the clock in the middle of the park pointed skyward, as if reaching for the moon. Unfortunately for them, tonight there was no moon to point at. The winter air grew fiercer as the night wore on. Inhaling felt as though it would freeze me from the inside. The air chilled me to the bone, threatening to pass up my spine directly to my brain. To prevent my mind from being paralyzed, and to prevent my fingertips from becoming stone, I sparked a fire using my internal rhythm and emotion.
触覚を譲るわ。幸運ね。あの位置なら刻んでおいたウィスプが止まる。
I responded to Alice with a nod. And then, for just a moment, I saw the ground. My legs quivered ever so faintly. I told myself they were shaking from the cold, but I wasn't so sure. In reality, they may not have been numbed by the cold, but by fear. I breathed a sigh of relief. My humanity must still be intact, if my emotions are still present. Before I could sink into a pool of my own sentimentality, then sensations from the bounded field flowed from Alice into me. A transparent wall covered the entire park. An unrecognizable carpet rooted deep under the earth. Alice Guanchi's chant of the Mother Goose fairy tale permeated the night. The sensation became one with my body. I felt goosebumps on my quivering right hand. Someone had trespassed. The goosebumps crept up my right arm like ants, and slowly but surely made inroads for my heart. Holding back the desire to drive them out, I waited for them to reach a certain definitive position. A moonless night. The park's quaint streetlights were not enough to lift the darkness. The ants came to a stop. Far, far from my right arm, they had reached my very heart. Even without the aid of my sense of sight, I could see the intruder lurking in the darkness. To starboard, in the bushes about 30 steps back, on all fours. It was beckoning with its right hand.
そこ!
The enemy's movement and my perception of it were in lockstep. I spun around. The enemy's arm stretched out like a spear. This lethal weapon, aimed at the back of my head, brushed my hair at breakneck speed. With the omniscient view granted by Alice Ward, I managed to avoid it by the skin of my teeth. Puppen. Huh? My hair fanned through the air from the violence of the attack. An attack grazed my cheek and I felt a small, sharp pain. It felt like the kiss of death. I switched the flow of my body's blood to a different cycle. The blood running through my veins at a few feet per second transmuted into an imaginary element. My body became a single circuit and my heart transformed into a completely different engine. An unknowable motion of immeasurable heat. A mystic yet untapped by humankind that made me who I am. The fire of life behind all miracles and fables. This is what we mages call magical energy.
セット
I turned around, set the enemy in my sight and held up one hand. My arm was the agent of my will. My lack of experience meant my magecraft would only be possible with the use of vocalizations and gestures. Magical formulae were engraved all over the park. All I had to do was ignite them. I needed to direct the flow of the magical energy within my body into each formula. Typically, a mage acts as a conduit. Whether wired or wireless, the mage simply pours magical energy into the formula. Releasing this energy in the form of a projectile, stream, or any number of other methods would usually suffice. But in my case, it was the feeling of my limbs whipping out.
燃えろ
Da ist der Flammenwerfer. I fought speed with speed. The enemy's arm, extended 10 feet forward, became engulfed in flames. It was nighttime at the park. The scene reminiscent of a campfire, but one in which the center of the flames contained a humanoid figure, wriggling like a shadow puppet. The flame subsided just as unnaturally as it had ignited. No crackling, no burning smell.
結界返すわ死体を確認するから
After telling this to Alice, I headed towards the motionless figure. I killed it. I killed it. I killed it. Regardless of who my opponent was, I just took someone's life. My throat parched. I swallowed the truth that without this sense of reality, I would have been helpless. So hard and bitter, impossible to swallow, but I tried to anyway. I was unnerving calm. My heart pounded and my breath felt heavy, but my mind was nonetheless calm. By the time I realized it, the charred remains were already in front of me. Bracing for a counterattack, I carefully examined the corpse. Everything seemed fine. This body lying slumped to the ground was nothing but ash.
Huh?
But something wasn't right. To begin with, its remains didn't smell organic. Not willing to believe my hunch, I took a closer look at the corpse's face. All that greeted me was the featureless white face of a mannequin.
ちくしょう、またやられた。
Screaming, I kicked the mannequin. The corpse crumbled to ash and disappeared with the wind. No, this was no corpse. This was just a puppet. And for all our effort to lure the master out, we had once again been tricked by a familiar. My debut, my first test out in the open, would be postponed for another day.
いつになったら一人前にって。あれ？
At that moment, I suddenly noticed something familiar in the corner of my eye. Something seemed strange about the slide on the other end to the park. It appeared as though its shadow were larger than it should be. Was I still drunk on the high of the battle? It took me a second to realize what it was.
誰？
Calling out was a mistake. Startled by my voice, the figure, wearing a familiar high school uniform, took a step back and then it broke into a sprint. Like someone running for their life. Wer das wohl sein kann? Or should I say he was doing exactly that?
追いかけて！見られた！
In a rush, I shouted to my partner, but she hadn't even noticed the third party's presence in the first place. Though it wasn't as if I could move by myself. Embarrassingly, the fight had taken more out of me than I'd have liked.
ダメ！逃げられる！捕まえて始末しないと！
There was no time for niceties. For us being seen here was a matter of life and death.
待って、この！
Shaking off the numbness in my legs, I made for the park's exit. I had to admire his escape. The witness party to the entire night's proceedings had disappeared into the darkness of the residential district without a trace.
ああ、もう結界にあいつの感触なんてなかったのに。
Complaining to myself wouldn't bring back the figure in uniform. Bitter at my own incompetence, I gave up the chase. Though temporary, the park had become Alice's woods. For anyone within a few feet of the park, other park goers, identifiable creatures and voices became murky, like the stuff of fairy tales. Tonight proceedings may have had a witness, but if our identities were still hidden, then this was still a chance.
あの背中、男だった。
I returned to the park. That uniform was without a doubt from my high school. That was clue enough. If he was a schoolmate of mine, I had plenty of methods to flush him out.
にしても、どうしてこう問題ばっかり増えていくんだろう。
Amidst my grumbling, I set my priorities straight. Before some strange rumors spread, I needed to seal the witness's mouth shut. That was the highest priority, quickly and without mercy. Looking up, I saw Alice's previously distant figure. Though she was in as much trouble as I was with her existence as a magus, also exposed, she had but one thing to say.
これは困ったことになったわね。
Her statue-like figure, staring into the darkness, seemed more expressionless than calm. I was pissed off. And her inscrutable voice resembled the moonless night so much it made me angry. Das ging schnell. Haben wir was Neues? Nee, nur Kapitel 3. Das war ja ein kurzes Kapitel. Blues in her name. Kapitel 4. There really isn't any other way of saying this. I am a magician. Kind of like those witches in fairy tales who live alone in the woods and perform miracles with the wave of a finger. While the popular depiction of it differs from reality, it's closer to the truth than you know. Though just so we are clear, no, I don't fly through the sky on a broom. I cannot transform into animals or speak with small birds. Modern mages are nothing so fanciful. Our existence sounds unbelievable, but we are quite grounded. Though it may seem like we can do anything, we are actually majorly constrained. And while I'll still have a lot to learn about it, this is my real job. Sounds a lot more romantic than being a high school student, right? Naturally, this is a secret I don't just share with anyone. A mage must do everything in their power to conceal their work. That is the first and most important of the association's 10 laws. Not that I'm tempted to let the cat out of the bag in the least. My secret identity as an honor student is intact, and absolutely no good would come of me revealing my true nature. If anything, it will only lead to more headaches. That's why I do everything in my power to keep it a secret. Of course, if I'd accomplished anything as a magician by now, then maybe I'd see it differently. I fantasized about revealing my secret life's work to a single, special person when I finally make something of myself. Yeah, it'd be pretty stellar to just confess one day, by the way, I'm a magician. That idea alone is enough to keep me from spoiling the big reveal, regardless of the association's rule. My grandfather patted me on the head when I shared these thoughts with him. I don't know if it was praise or what, but I remember that his touch was gentle. I first learned that I would be succeeding my grandfather on the day I graduated middle school. When I returned home, there he was. Your elder sister left on a journey. From this day forth, you are the heir to the Aosaki. He said it in such a matter-of-fact way. I knew that the Aosaki family passed down this old tradition of magecraft. But to be honest, I never imagined I would be the one to wield it. Magecraft is supposed to be passed down to a single child. It was my sister's role to take the mantle, and I had no interest in dedicating myself to so many rules and routines. I planned to live a normal life. I had hopes and dreams for the future. I felt bad for my sister, but I was determined to live my life my way. And while I managed to do just that for a time, I was blindsided by a vicious counterpunch. Oh, Himmel. Since then, I've been crushed headlong, only observed from afar. It was a hell of a way to start high school. But I suppose it wasn't all that bad, all things considered. A lot has happened since then. I was so dazed by this newfound life that a year of school motored right by. I was the second year before I knew it. Thankfully, nothing drastic has happened. The 6 months, my roommate and I totally tried to kill each other, notwithstanding. As it happened, I got a natural talent at this magecraft stuff, so I have yet to have any hang up there either. I'm only human, so I've had my fair share of headaches for sure, but never once did I worry about my future. Though my life would be smooth sailing all the way. If only everything had gone to plan last night.
どう？
Alice Kuonji asked Aoko Aosaki the second she entered the house. Her dark eyes succeeded where her voice failed to communicate the gravity of the situation. Aoko took off her unflattering coat, hung it on the hanger, and sat down on the sofa. Alice sat across from her, with a table separating them.
そっちは？よくないわね。偵察に行けるのは7個ぐらい。ここのところ使ってばかりで作り置きをする余裕もなかったし。
Alice's gaze drifted from Aoko to the box on the table.
あの夜、町を監視していた奴はいないの？町の偵察は完璧なんでしょ？そいつら。それは昼間の話よ。夜間飛行は危険が多いわ。
Meaning they were of the least use when needed the most. Aoko sighed.
そういうあなたは？朝は随分と強気だったけど。ん？ああ、こっちは予定通りよ。明日までには絞り込めると思う。今朝、飛び丸にうちの生徒の自宅と行動時間を調べさせたから。
Poor.
あの時間に公園をうろつくやつはめったにいないし、簡単に割り出せる。そう簡単に行くの？行くわよ。伊達に生徒会に勤めてないわ。その程度のデータは揃えてある。月1のバイト先はおろか、親しい友人宅との移動時間、その優先順位まで調べ上げてるんだから。人には見せたくなかったリストだけど、そんな余裕ないでしょ？だから、そういうのが向いてる副会長にやらせたの。
Incidentally, the creation of this secret file started the moment Aoko became student council president. The mere rumor of its existence was enough to strike fear into the entire student body.
そう。徹
Berechtigt.
底しているわね。相変わらず。
Alice was only mildly surprised. It had been almost 2 years since they first started living together. She knew as well as anyone that when Aoko put her mind into something, she saw it through to the end.
ま、私もあれがこんな風に役立つとは思ってもみなかったけど。ほんと、備えあれば憂いなしとはこのことね。
But what happened last night was far beyond a mere exception to the rule. This predicament should not have been possible.
それより原因は分かったの？結界の結びに不手際があったなんてのは聞かないわよ。
Aoko glared at her. The ward was Alice's responsibility. If it was to blame for last night's trouble, Alice had to own up to her fair share. Alice and Aoko may have been roommates and partners, but it was a relationship of convenience. While lineage had brought them together, they were more like enemies than allies. Ultimately, they were just not a match. Where there was a blunder, it was punished. Where there was an opening, it would be attacked. If there was even an opportunity, the two of them would kill each other in the event of such a moment. Alice locked eyes with Aoko. Aoko's fierce gaze could make a grown man cower in fear, but Alice did not bat an eyelash.
仮の話だけど、あの結界に落ち度があったのなら、今まで何度もこういう状況になっていたでしょうね。
I suppose you're right, Aoko agreed, as the question reaffirmed her trust in Alice.
結界のあり方は完璧だったのね。
絶対とまでは断言はできないけど。
Alice answered as flatly as ever. A bounded field is like a sanctuary sealed away from the real world. Steps are taken whereby a certain area is cut off from the outside world. There are various kinds of bounded fields. There are physical ones that close off an area behind a wall, and less tangible ones that use mirrors, mist, or trees to conceal which occurs within. However, when closing off an area to the outside, you cannot avoid communication, the abnormalities existent. In other words, the area may be closed off to the outside world, but it is impossible to hide the fact that it is closed off. In time, someone will take interest in a sealed-off area, even if they cannot see what is going on inside. Some might say this is putting the cart before the horse. The ideal field would be one that was both undetectable and impervious to interference from the outside. That was exactly the kind Alice had generated in the park the night before.
その場所に用があっても、今はないように思わせれば、誰もそこには立ち入らない。隠したい場所の周りに、一時的な意識の改ざんを促す結界を張る。手間はかかるんだけど、1時間程度の人よけには信頼性は高い結界よね。アリスの鏡を使った一級品だし、途中で破れることもない。事実、入ってきたのはあの人形だけだとはっきり感じられた。これで完璧じゃなかったら何が完璧なのよ。
私もわからない。森作りに落ち度はなかったわ。森は数日かけて栽培したものだし、今まで通り信頼できる結界よ。けど例外があったのなら、どこかで見落としがあったのね。
Though Alice's words conceded the possibility, her eyes expressed her confidence that she had overlooked nothing.
参った。こうなると、一番いいのは、あいつが人形使いだってパターンね。それならかろうじて納得できる。相手が魔術師なら、結界の侵入ぐらいできるでしょうし。問題は、侵入した時の違和感をどうやって消したかってことだけど。
The thought of being targeted by this individual was pretty terrifying. If they were able to penetrate Alice's field, it could only mean that their skill in magecraft was superior to Alice's. Alice, in her current state, would be completely helpless against such a foe.
その
mehr
線はない
Schokolade.
わ。彼は部外者よ。ムクドリはともかくロビンが後をたどれなかったもの。魔力の気配は全くなし。誰かの魔術で操られている犠牲者というのもないわね。
Aoko was quickly running out of straws to grasp at. And that meant she was out of questions to ask. All she could do was call it bad luck and leave it at that.
魔術師の秘密を見られて、おまけに目撃者を逃がしたか。普通の高校生の悩みじゃないな。
The sofa groaned as she leaned back. Her gaze went up to the brown ceiling with a sigh. It wasn't much of a view. She was becoming increasingly depressed.
青子、覚悟を決めておいて。
Her roommate's voice seemed indifferent, but Aoko just kept staring up at the wooden ceiling.
それとも、あなたにできないのなら、私が言ってあげてもいいけど。
The cool-mannered girl's statement carried an equally icy implication. Aoko took the words in slowly, with as much sincerity as she could muster. It was like trying to swallow molten lead.
そうだ。覚悟なんて、もう決めたでしょ。
The thought sounded hollow even as it popped into her head. This was clearly different from last time. While the aim was indeed the same, the circumstances surrounding her target were clearly different. She may have been determined before, but that was as a mage. If enemies emerged, she would kill them. If she was challenged, she would step up to the fight. It was a fight between two mages, and her opponent was in the wrong. Even if this could only end in death for one of them, it was an outcome both parties could accept. Kill or be killed. Morality had no weight on the scale. But this time was different. Her opponent was neither enemy nor mage. Even if she was prepared to kill them, this person was likely not ready to die. That's why morality did factor into it, now. Was she truly up to the task of murdering an innocent person? Could she swallow the fact that this was a common occurrence for a mage? She snorted sardonically. Being a mage did not mean that Aoko was some kind of monk who could cut ties with the real world on a whim. If there was one thing Aoko hated, it was doing things without conviction or an understanding of exactly why she was doing them. When she acted, she preferred to act decisively.
やるしかないだろうね。
As she said it, she got up from the sofa, having had her fill on the ceiling for one day. Aoko had returned to the Aoko of always, and Alice was done probing her.
じゃあ、これ。
As if to reward her, Alice produced a small bottle. It fit neatly in the palm of her hand. The bottle looked completely out of place in her slender fingers. The glass was cloudy, and it appeared empty. Some shreds of paper remained on the front, where there was once a label.
何よそれ。
Aoko stared at the bottle suspiciously.
収納の小瓶。ちょうど一つ余ってたから、あげるわ。
はい？
名前は忘れたけど、中国の小説に出てきたのと同じよ。
Aoko was miraculously able to parse what Alice meant.
それってレンゲ堂の兄弟の話？じゃああの赤いひょうたんと同じなわけ？言いたくないけど、そこら辺の風邪薬のラベルを無理やり剥がして小瓶に見せかけてるそれが？
Alice looked at the bottle and acknowledged how ordinary it looked. She also understood that she would not be the one using it as she set it on the table.
赤いひょうたんじゃなくて陽子玉の上瓶の方。
そういう問題じゃない。私は魔術師としての雰囲気を論じてるんだ。
些細なことを気にするのね。せいろがんの瓶じゃないだけいいと思うけど。
She made a good point.
蓋を開けて相手の名前を尋ねればいいから。ただし相手に抵抗する意志が残っている場合、小瓶は割れるから気をつけて。
Aoko raised her eyebrows.
ちょっと待った。抵抗する意志があるとダメって眠っている時にやれってこと？
それは試したことがなかったわ。眠っているのに返事をする人っているの？
たまにいるけど。まあ確かに珍しいわね、そういう人。
In that case, one would have to weaken them until they were about to pass out.
ああ、そうそう。薬や魔術がかかっているとその重さでも割れるから気をつけて。
使えない。それってほとんど役立たずってことじゃない。
それは青子次第ね。
Alice turned away as she replied, as if the topic no longer mattered to her.
はあ、アリスがこういう小道具好きなのは知ってたけどね。これも趣味なわけ？
Aoko asked, hoping Alice would deny it.
多分。それでどうするの？持っていくのか行かないのか。
Without answering, Aoko differed a bit before taking the bottle and putting it in her pocket. She figured she might be able to find some use for it. Two hours had passed, and the clock struck 9. Their conversation had moved from the drawing room to the sunroom, and had manifested into the kind of scene one would not expect in such a mansion.
まあ本当はね、飛び丸に任せる気はなかったんだけど。
A hot earthenware pot sat on the table. Aoko spat out complaints to no one in particular as she plucked food from it with her chopsticks. Tonight they were eating a traditional Japanese meal that looked out of place in this mansion. When it came to the kind of Japanese hot pot where all one had to do was buy and boil ingredients, it was usually Aoko's responsibility. Alice sat across from Aoko as she silently poked at the pot with a fork.
山城のやつが来るなり、しずきくんはまだ部活に入っていないから面倒見てあげてくれないかななんて言ってくるもんだからさ。全校生徒の行動範囲なんて見直す気力なくなっちゃったのよ。
The egg she had plucked was still as silky as a baby's bottom, so she returned it to the pot. She settled for the shirataki noodles instead. Sie benutzen eine
そり
Gabel.
ゃあのバカがバイトで忙しいのは知ってるわよ。だからできるだけ春先までのんびりしてて、あんなのでも親身になってくれそうな部の部長に当たってみたのに、ありがとうの一つもないってのはちょっと尺に触るわよね。ねえ、聞いてるアリス。
As if her mouth was full, she simply nodded in response. Her expression stated that she had no interest nor opinion on the matter, but she at least appeared to be listening. Satisfied, Aoko nibbled on some hempened fish cake.
それに私、いい人なんて言われるやつは信用できないのよ。あろうことか、飛び丸までそんなこと口走る始末だし。あれはいい人なんじゃなくて、ただぼんやりしてるだけなんだっての。だいたいあそこまで言われて怒りもしないなんてどうかしてるわ。
Her thoughts went to what had happened in the student council room earlier that day. She remembered how non-responsive Sojiro had been to her words. His unconcerned face alone was enough for her to swallow the rest of her happen without chewing.
何が分かってるんだなよ。
His words were a lot like those that ended her childhood.
青子ちゃんは分かっているんだね。それでも自分であり続けられるということはとても強いことなんだよ。
Perhaps it was meant as a compliment, but she took it as a patronizing way to pity her. Because the person who said it had acted like she was looking at a wounded animal.
あんな変態の言ってたことなんて今更どうでもいいけどさ。
Was ihre Schwester? That episode might have made her the most confused she ever had been in her life. Yet what shook young Aoko the most was to look of pity on the face of the person she admired the most.
喧嘩。
The abrupt comment stopped her in her tracks.
ごめん、聞いてなかった。喧嘩ってあの喧嘩？
Alice nodded.
あなたの感想だけじゃ状況はよくつかめないけど、つまり青子はその人に喧嘩を売りたかったのね。
Alice spit into the very last henten. Her remark was unexpected but completely on point.
なんでそうなるのよ。私はあんなのと1秒だって関わりたくないだけだってば。だいたいそれどころじゃないし、興味とか全くないし、会話もこれ以上ないってぐらい簡潔に切り上げたし。
Die hat echt Probleme.
ならどうして今そんな話をするの？
それはあんたに今日の調査過程を知らせてあげたのよ。それ以外何があるっていうの？
What other reason could Alice be suggesting Aoko had for bringing it up? It would be several hours later in bed that Aoko realized that she had dug her own grave.
いいけど、私は別に。ただ、青子は本当にその人が嫌いなの？
Alice ate her hot pot in silence, as if she was honoring some sort of sacred ritual. Her face was as indifferent as always, but she was secretly enjoying how flustered Aoko was. Aoko was none the wiser to this. Normally she would have noticed immediately, but she was not quite herself at this moment.
本当にって、そりゃそうよ。気に食わないって何度も言ってるじゃない。
そう。具体的には？
は？具体的にはって、そんなのに理由なんて。
She trailed off as she finally realized how disagreeable she was being. She could come up with no reason why. Her instinct had told her that she was incompatible with that hick. But why such a strong reaction? More than anything in the world, Aoko hated emotions without reason and decisions made with no rationale.
嫌いなものは嫌いなんだから、ちゃんとどっかに理由があるんだと思うけど。
She became more flustered the more she talked. Unfortunately for her, she could not come up with a coherent reason to hate Soshiro's Shizuki. It was not his fault that he had zero common sense. It was the fault of the environment he grew up in. In fact, it was admirable that he was trying so hard to adapt to civilized society. As clueless as he might seem, he was not a complete waste of space. If he seemed a bit slow, it was only because his gentle nature compelled him to think before acting. When one looked at everything objectively, then conclusion was obvious. As much as she was loath to admit it, he really was a good guy. Everyone had him pegged as.
ちょっと本気かっての。人間的に悪いところ本当にみじんもないのかあれ。
There was plenty, so she left it at that for now. The chopsticks she had been using came to a stop. She was getting very annoyed. An irrational hatred burned through her head. Unable to come to terms with her feelings, she desperately tried to analyze Soshiro, but her mind only went in more circles. Alice fixed Aoko with a deadpan stare.
呆れた。
A small sigh.
らしくないわね。
Those words were the final blow. Aoko felt the floor fall out from under her. She was unable to leave her chair until long after Alice had finished eating and left.